Hello, everyone. Welcome to Question Everything, a podcast all about learning from the successes and the failures of those who dare to, question everything. This podcast is part interview, part therapy, and part Price is Right. We have our own game board stacked with questions that'll make even the most successful CMOs sweat. I'm your host, Ashley Walters, CMO and partner at Curiosity. On today's episode, I sit down with Dan Jeffries, founder of Jeffries Consulting. His goal is to forge world-class relationships among brands, agencies, and procurement teams. Today, you'll learn completely avoidable reasons why CMOs put agencies up for review, why agencies should never rewrite a client brief, and Dan's bad news for ditch the pitch believers. If you know anything about Dan, he shoots it straight and never holds back. Check it out. With over a decade at Jeffries Consulting, Daniel Jeffries has earned a national reputation for helping the world's most recognized brands forge groundbreaking agency relationships. Besides sourcing dream teams for companies like Samsung, PetSmart, Capital One, Sonic, and of course AutoZone, Daniel's unique point of difference is his conviction to stay on after the contract is signed, to train CMOs on the art of agency management, brief writing, and conflict resolution. Prior to consulting, Daniel served as an agency procurement lead, a driving instructor, and a combat medic. Needless to say, Dan's got a little something for everybody. Welcome to the podcast, Dan. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Very good indeed.
I'm so excited for this. We've known each other for a long time. We might even dig into some of those old reviews that I was a part of. PetSmart was one of them. And so I'm excited to have you here and kind of dig into your career and your journey, which is like so fascinating. The consultant side, procurement side, there's just so much to learn there. So thanks for saying yes.
No, I appreciate you guys having me on. I've watched a few of these and I find them really interesting.
Awesome. So what have you been up to lately? Like what's new with Dan?
Well, on a personal side, I've just come back from London. I arrived back last night. I was over there for a wedding. My younger brother got married on Saturday.
Congratulations.
So that was nice to go back and see family. I don't see them very often. We all live around the world, so we don't get together very often. You asked me a question a minute ago, what's my name? And who calls me what? I get called Dan by most of the people I know, but I've just spent the weekend being called Daniel by my mother, my father, and my two brothers. So it's kind of weird.
I love that. Well, I've always called you Dan, but then your website is Daniel. And I'm like, well, what do you prefer? So
I don't mind, whatever.
Okay, well, we heard it here first. Call him Dan.
Yeah, call me Dan.
Awesome.
But other than that, work-wise, we've got loads going on. Really kind of busy start to the year. Quieting down a little bit in the summer, which was great. I could work on my golf game. And then since kind of late August, it's gone a bit mad, as it kind of does every year. It's good.
Yeah, we're feeling it over here too. It's mayhem right now, I feel like.
Yeah, it's certainly got busy, and it feels like there's a lot more coming down the pipe. So it's we've got stuff through the end of this year that's going to close out. We've got projects running all the way through to the end of 2024, and already stuff starting in January and into February as well. So it's going to be a busy period.
Cool. Well, and I know, did I hear this right? You have shot 3 hole-in-ones.
I've actually shot 5.
5 hole-in-ones? I thought I was exaggerating with 3.
On 3 different continents.
3 continents. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. That's an interesting little factoid.
5 hole-in-ones. Like most golfers will go their whole life without shooting 1, and you have 5.
I'm just lucky.
Okay. All right. I hope you made a lot of money on those.
Probably spent more than I made.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's dig into it. You know exactly how this podcast works. We have 12 super spicy questions. You don't know which question is behind which number, but the power is in your hands. So where are we going to go first?
Number 4, please.
Number 4. What is the best advice you can give for CMOs looking to repair a broken agency relationship?
Well, the number 1 advice is give me a call.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was just too easy.
No, I mean, well, that's why I want to know, because you're oftentimes like on the front end of creating that initial relationship, but I know you also stay on and you consult with brands and help just make sure that relationship is really strong. And then I might imagine you get called a lot to help fix it too when things don't go the right way.
Definitely. I think the biggest issue is clients don't pay attention to it. They go through all the work and the cost associated with it of getting a new agency in play. And then they say, okay, let's go. And then they start working with that agency, and the whole working relationship with that agency becomes quite transactional. And it's sort of, here's the brief, respond to the brief, give us the work, move on. Here's the brief, respond to the brief. And there's no sort of relational counseling or any relational sort of management. So a lot of times, smart clients, and there are some of them out there, they invest in what procurement people would call SRM, which is supplier relationship management. In the agency world, you can call it anything you want, but it's just agency management, and it's a structured, ongoing process where you can assess how the agency is performing beyond the obvious, which is, are they responding to the brief? Are they doing it in time? But what are the behaviors like? What are the personalities like? Are people getting along with each other? Often agency relationships break down because of like one or two people. It's that simple. The creative guy is just a bit too up his own arse, or, the strategy guy wants to pontificate on everything, or, sorry, I just said arse. Or, sorry.
You're good. You're good. You can cuss on this podcast.
Or it could be something that, they just don't get along. And the problem is that then that whole relationship gets tainted by one person, and no agency should be losing business on the basis of that. No client should be going to pitch because of that. So I think it's interesting. Most of the times when I start a pitch, the first thing I'll ask a client is, why are we doing this? What's so bad that this has to change? And often it could be the end of a long term. It's been 10 years and they've just kind of run out of steam, in which case, okay. It could be that there's a new broom coming through. It might be a new CMO, and they just don't particularly value the agency. And that's a difficult one to fix. Or it could be that's 3-4 years into a relationship and it started to sour a little bit, and maybe the promises aren't being met. And I think that, a CMO's job is to basically get the best out of that agency. And sometimes by not managing it, they're never going to do that. So I would suggest to CMOs, if they're struggling with a relationship that's not working, first thing is, if they've got resources internally who are independent of the team, bring them in. But if they don't, go to a third party, someone like me or any number of other people, and get them to come in and sort of run a quick assessment of what's wrong. And that can be a bit of counseling. Often these sessions literally are like counseling. And you talk to the agency and you find out that the agency is just bloody frustrated because the client changed their mind 15 times on a project. And then they put the agency on the back foot, and they're always working weekends to try and achieve something. Or the client's annoyed because the agency never sends, a pre-briefing to an agency call, so they don't know what they're going to talk about, or any number of things. And I think that it's funny. One of the biggest frustrations between clients and agencies is poor briefing. And I would say 5 times out of 10, poor briefing is the sort of genesis of the problem. It's either the client not briefing the agency well enough, the agency rewriting the brief because they don't like it, or they've got a weird internal process where they do that, or there being no brief, and the brief being literally an email or a phone call. And I think that's the start of a lot of problems.
Yeah. Why is that still happening today? I've had a lot of guests on this podcast who have mentioned this, and some people who take the briefing really seriously. Like we had Grace on here from P&G Native, and like briefing is her thing. She has studied it. She has an art to it. She takes it very seriously, but there are a lot of clients out there that don't. Why is that? And why isn't there more training?
Marketers aren't classically educated anymore, because the reality is, you talk about P&G as an example. P&G are just such a great example of a marketing organization. And when you go in there as an employee and you're a part of that marketing team, you're taught how to do all the various aspects of an agency relationship well before you're given the chance to do it. So you're taught how to brief, you're taught how to assess a brief, you're taught how to assess creative, you're taught what category management looks like. And the problem is that a lot of marketeers haven't gone through that schooling anymore. And that's not to say they're not smart people. No one's ever sat them down and said, this is what a brief should be. They've never worked in an agency, so they've never been on the receiving end of it. And so they go through the process of kind of, oh, well, what brief do you use, agency? Now, I'll tell you now, if a client says to an agency, well, what brief do you like to use? That tells you straight away they probably don't really know what they're doing when it comes to briefing, or they're very happy to just do whatever you say. So I think part of it is an educational piece with clients, is that they're not always educated on how to brief, or they've just got into bad habits. Maybe they work with an agency that was just very receptive to the email or a phone call or a text, and they did an amazing job with it, so they get lazy. But I think that, the brief, I've actually done briefing training for clients where we've taught them how to brief, like across a suite of marketeers. And one of the things that I always kind of come back to is the brief is the lens through which you've got to assess creative. So if you don't do a brief how the hell can you really assess creative? It just becomes an opinion. My opinion is that this is good, this is bad. But without the brief, I can't truly assess it through that lens. And so I think that's the need of the brief, is to be able to assess creative properly and respond.
Yeah, that's really true. You said something else that's really interesting to me on agencies writing their own brief. So they'll take a client brief and then they'll just go ahead and write their own. And you seem like there was a little tension there. I'd love for you to talk about that. Why do agencies do it? I've seen that too. We've done it even where we'll take a brief, rewrite it. Is that a waste of time? Should agencies be doing that, in your opinion?
Generally, it happens when a client's briefs are not brief. When they're
72 pages.
lacking in brevity, and they give you a 12-page brief. And the reality is that strategies or account teams often say, well, if we give our creatives a 12-page brief, they'll never get anything out of the back end of it, which I personally think is a bit of an insult to creatives. But I think the challenge is that if there's no real thought gone into it from the client perspective, and they're just filling a brief in because it's a template, then I can understand why agencies might want to rewrite it and just pull out the nuggets that really matter. But the issue is, when you rewrite something that I've written, you're going to make some assumptions on what I was thinking. And they're your assumptions, they're not mine.
Yeah.
So you're going to assume that when I wrote mails like this, or I talked about an audience, or I talked about a thought, you're going to assume through your lens, which is what all the experience you've had and all the thinking you've had, you're going to assume that I meant this. And it's like, remember playing telephone when you were a kid?
Yes.
You go through 10 sets of hands, and a message can get diluted from, something that was very clear to something that's very unclear, or it can be completely different. Well, if you rewrite someone's brief and you put some assumptions over the top of it, you're going to start to get down that route of telephone. So if we think about the worst case scenario in this, is I'm a client, I write a brief, and that brief goes through some kind of colleagues of mine on my side before it goes to the agency. I might be a CMO and I've got a brief in my mind, and then my creative organization go through it and they do some work with it, and then somebody else does some work with it. And then that brief leaves our organization, goes to Curiosity see it and go, I'm not really buying this. So, your account guy has a little tweak on it, and then your strategy guy has a little tweak on it, and then your creative guy sees it. So it's gone through 5 sets of hands between when it was set up and now. And the problem with that is that all those assumptions along the way and suppositions along the way on certain things, it's going to change. And what I meant and what I wanted might not be what that brief says. So then here's the worst case: is you do some amazing work, you go off and you do your work, and you're building your strategy, and you come back with some great creative, and it answers the brief that creative saw. That wasn't my brief. So when you bring that to me, I go, well, I didn't answer the brief. You missed this key thing. And no one's really at fault in this. No one's done anything wrong. You guys have worked your ass off. I thought I gave you a clear brief, but somewhere along the line, it changed. And I think that's why briefing is such an important part of the agency-client relationship. It's got to be done well. It's got to be.
Good advice. All right, let's go back to the board.
Number 11, please.
Number 11. Agency compensation is a hot topic right now. Where are compensation models headed? What are you seeing?
This has been a hot topic for 20 years.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if agencies continue to sell hours, then clients will continue to buy hours. It's just the reality of it. Mm-hmm. And if agencies want to get away from that and start to work towards outputs and outcomes, they have to really build their model and even their business against that. And not enough agencies do. That's the reality. I mean, you guys are an independent, so you probably can. But if you're a WPP shop or a Publicis shop, you can't just suddenly go, oh, well, you know what, this hours thing, we're done with it. We're going to go fully to outputs, and we're going to actually price all our business on that. It doesn't work like that. Yeah. And I think the problem is that it's got to be driven by the agencies as much as it has by the clients to make significant change. What I do see is, there are some relationships that I've worked on and that I continue to work on where we've been able to elevate the relationship to a very clear scope, and the scope is very clear on what's expected over a 12-month period. And the agency prices against that and says, okay, well, we think it's going to be this much based on the people serving it. And then that conversation is kind of put to bed, and then it's just about delivering.
Yeah.
That's really the ideal. That's the ideal sort of scenario because it's based on the outcomes. The issue is if the client changes 5 of those outcomes in a year and the agency says, well, it's actually going to cost us a lot more to do what you've changed it to. Well, how are you going to benchmark that? Where are you going to go back to for price? And so you're always going to be up against that. It's an age-old problem and it's very difficult to solve. I think a big part of what I do with clients is put incentives on it. So, go to a base fee and then build a massive incentive over the top of it, maybe 20% of the base fee, which is based purely on achieving outcomes. And so that's that thing about getting the agency and the client working well together, aligned on goals, aligned on objectives, and really driving towards the same endpoint. But that can be unfair on agencies too, because sometimes those objectives or those situations are taken out of your hand.
Yeah.
You can do all you can do, but then the client has a recall on a product.
Yeah.
This actually happened to me. I was working with a very, very large technology company who do phones and watches and computers and stuff like that. And we did a big deal. This goes back this is 6-7 years ago in New York. And I remember we did this really good incentive-based compensation, and the agency could have made significant millions on top. And they did. They did everything they could do. But then halfway through that year, the client, one of their main devices that they sold to the public, basically started going wrong. So they had a real revenue issue. Mm. And part of the incentive was tied back to the sales of this particular product. So that agency did everything they could do, and they still didn't get paid. And so that's in my kind of take, that's unfair. And that client tried to make good on that in some ways, but it's funny. Agencies, I always hear talk about, well, what other compensation models are on? And then I just go back to the agencies. So, well, what do you want? How do you want to sell yourself? I'd ask you that question. How do you want to sell yourself?
Yeah. Well, how do you compare proposals? I imagine you get a few of them on any given pitch, and you've got one who's more of like a deliverables, outputs, outcomes kind of model, and then you have another one that's like an FTE hourly model. Like, are you just looking at the bottom line, or how do you compare apples to apples with these different agencies?
So when I run a pitch, I'll brief the agencies on what I'm expecting, whether it's an output-based model or whether it's going to be an hours and time and hours type one. And I'll say now, most of them are time and hours. It's just especially when you're running these big, pitches for organizations with procurement teams who want to see the numbers, they want to understand what they're getting. They want to see the comparison. Unfortunately, it's still the only. Well, that's not the only. It's still the best way to make that comparison happen.
Yeah.
And so I'll brief the agencies and say, here's the scope, here's all the deliverables, build a team, price out the team, let us know what's going to go against that.
Yeah. I want to stop doing timesheets, like ultimately. So how do I get there?
The reality of the timesheet thing is it's just like throwing darts at a board. It's made up. None of it's real. And I try to say this to clients. I say, look, you realize the agencies aren't doing this with any discipline. Go and work in an agency for 5 minutes. You'll know what a ball ache timesheets are. Nobody really wants to do them. They all get done on a Friday afternoon. Expenses won't be paid unless they're done, that sort of stuff. They're nonsense. And so I'll say to clients on this one, I'll say, look, what you're looking for when you're getting a pricing proposal in is, I can give you some insight into what sort of size teams you expect to deliver certain size scopes. That's out there. But then after that, it's a case of you just got to trust the agency. These are your partners.
Right.
And I mean, one of the clients I worked with last year, they do a reconciliation. And I advise them against that. I say, all you're going to do if you do that is commoditize your agency and create like a combative relationship from day one, because they've got to track every hour and justify the costs associated with them. And knowing that you're going to come in and look at it and you're going to try and true up or down. And I said to this client, I said, well, what happens if the agency puts 20% more time in than agreed? Are you going to pay them the extra 20%?
Yeah. Oh,
well, no, because it doesn't work like that because, we don't have the funding for it. So well, why should they ever come in under hours then? So it's poor incentives. It's just dumb incentives. So I'll build a team based on those hours. And then really what you're looking at after that is the outcomes. Did they deliver or did they not?
Yeah. That's good. I love the idea of the success metrics and setting those in advance. We've had some really good success in doing that. And I think it does make it more mutually beneficial too. And you do feel like you're part of a bigger team. It's a deeper partnership. So yeah, I've seen that work really well. I think more clients should start pushing that harder, make it happen more.
It's becoming more prevalent in media. Media, it's easier to do because the metrics are more, binary really. In creative, I think a lot of clients are reluctant to do it because they're saying, well, what do we measure? And it's not that hard. There's stuff out there you can measure, brand measures, you can look at sales, you can look at the effectiveness of advertising, you can look, there's so many different things that you do to measure advertising effectiveness. Why can't you use those numbers? But I think what it comes down to in the long run is that clients are slightly worried that if their business just takes off because it's good, they'll end up rewarding an agency, even though the agency hasn't done anything. And I'm like, well, no, that's part of the team. You're part of a team. You're together. You kind of rise and fall together. And
it's a good thing.
Some clients are good at it, some less so. It's a battle every time.
Definitely something people should be considering for sure.
No doubt.
All right, let's go back to the board.
Let's go for number 5, please.
Number 5. You have no rhyme or reason for this, do you?
No.
All right. So you've heard of ditch the pitch, I'm sure, being a search consultant. I am curious, what's your take on this ditch the pitch movement?
I'm going to be contentious now, I'm afraid. I mean, look, I get it when pitches are done badly. I'll be honest with you. I think if a client spends over a certain budget and they don't use a third party to do a pitch professionally, agencies are dumb getting involved in it. They really are, because often it's just maybe it's a procurement practice to try and figure out where their fees are at, and they're using it to reduce costs. So I think there are times when you shouldn't take part in a pitch because I don't think they're legitimate, or there's going to be an outcome at the end of it that's going to be worthwhile. But I'll tell you something about pitching that I hear agencies whinge about all the time. It's the cost of winning business. Every industry has a cost associated with winning business. I have a cost associated with winning business. I have to go to conferences. It's not free. I have to get on a plane, I have to fly there, I have to talk to people, I have to spend that money. It's a cost of winning business. Every single industry. Look at the car industry. How much money they spend to try and sell a car. You know what I mean? And the pitch is just our version of that. It's our cost of winning business.
The test drive.
And there are times when it gets completely out of hand.
Yeah.
And I agree that it's done badly. But to suddenly say, well, we're going to just get rid of it, and clients should just pick an agency out of the blue. Well, I mean, I'll tell you now, all that will do will upset all the other agencies who don't get picked to given a chance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I actually think the ditch the pitch thing has merit for bad pitches, but I would rather see energy go into how do we improve the pitches.
Yeah.
And that's where I think we can make a difference.
So what are some things you're testing and trying now to improve the pitch process?
I'm always looking to innovate the process itself or the process, as you like to call it, to try and make it more something that agencies want to take part in and are willing to invest in. Big thing for me is access to the clients early on, as early as possible, so that agencies understand as much about the client as possible through the process, so they can perform better. When I bring in 8 agencies, let's say, to an RFI phase, I truly want those 8 agencies to be able to win the business. I don't agree with bumping the numbers because we need to have 8 and only 6 of them are going to be successful. It's nonsense. It's just the wrong way to go. I think the other thing is, you think about something like smaller pitches where maybe there's not as much of a fee to win. I think you can simplify the front stage much quicker. I was at Brown Week actually, and I spoke to somebody you compete with. I won't name drop her on this just in case she doesn't want to be name dropped. And she was telling me about a process that I was really it really resonated with me. And it was a fast process. And rather than having an RFI phase, what they did was they said to the agencies, you've got an hour to present your case to the client, and we'll pick 3 to go forward to the final pitches. So no kind of big written RFI, but you've got to be able to talk in an hour why you. And I like that, because I think what that does is it shows the client the agency from day one, not on paper, but straight into it. it gives the agency access to the client on day one. And that's not a bad thing either. And it's quick, it's fast. You get to a fast decision. Am I in, am I out? And investment from you guys reduces. And anything you can do to reduce that investment is a good thing. And turn it to gold. So that's another one. I'm also a bit of a fan of live briefings. And, for a long time, we've been reluctant to do live briefings because the problem with them is, if I do a live briefing for 4 agencies, that's 4 1-hour sessions that I've got to organize, and we've got to get people there. I'm like, put them all in the room together, brief at the same time. Because I think what happens when you do that is it makes the client look more human. They're not repeating the same garbage for 4 hours. It also gets rid of that nonsense where the agencies are forever trying to find out who else is in the mix because they'll know. So it simplifies that a little bit for them as well. And also, I think it's better for the client. The client sees these agencies as one kind of amorphous blob and says, okay, I'm talking to you all about this at the same time. I'm giving you all the same information, the same insight. We did one this year where we did it on the client's site. We took them to a client retail location, and we asked the client if we could do it, and the client was kind of excited about it. We used this place to do it. They did a walk around the store together, all agencies. The client brought in some very senior people because it was only an hour. It wasn't 4 1-hour sessions. It was 1 hour. They brought in like the CEO. They brought in other people. The agencies suddenly got access to these people they would never have got access to. So I think that's a good. It's not an innovation really. It's just a good way to do things.
I was secretly hoping to be in that room when that briefing took place, but
I know you are.
Next time. I learned a lot in that process. But you have been focused on like speeding up the process too, which I think is really beneficial to agencies because sometimes they can just drag on for months and months and months. And that's part, I think, of the resentment that agencies have, where it takes a long time. It's a lot of work, a lot of hours. And then, a 1 in 8 or even a 1 in 4 shot, it's hard to repeat that, especially smaller shops like us.
I think the other thing agencies, and it's easy for me to say from my position, but agencies need to be more discerning about what they take on. They really do. They need to be more thoughtful about where are we going to invest our time and effort. The problem is you can do that as an independent. The reality is a lot of the network agencies can't say no. They're so driven by the success metrics that have been put on top of them that they almost have to take part. If they get given an invite and they don't take part, someone's going to turn around and say, well, why are you not doing this? Why are you not trying? You can win this, even though they've got no chance. And so it's funny, I'm doing one at the moment with a pretty big, national provider, and it's a pretty meaty creative pitch. And we were really, as a team on the client side, we were really, really deliberate and disciplined in who we invited. And, I've been contacted by pretty much every agency in the land since they found out we were doing this one to say, well, can we be in? And it's like, no, because you can't win it. And there's no point in you being in this if you can't win it. It's not worth your time. And the client doesn't want to waste anyone's time. They're respectful. So I don't know, go back to the ditch the pitch thing. It's never going to get ditched.
Yeah.
The only hope we can have is that we improve it.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's mutually beneficial for agency and brands if it gets improved, because brands don't want the cost of dragging it out either, right? I mean, they want immediate impact. And so part of that is I have some clients who will call and, they don't work with a consultant. They're trying to lead the pitch on their own. And those are always a little scary, honestly, too, because a consultant can really streamline it and force some decision and process in it. But I oftentimes will say to them, you can't afford to do this process the way you want to do it. You don't have the time, or you can't waste all the money on this. This is going to be very expensive for you. Have you considered a different approach? And it's fascinating.
And that's the problem is, if you think about it, if you ditch the pitch, you said, okay, we're not going to have any pitches anymore. New business would be won only through relationships, direct relationships. So how would anyone ever grow? How would any agency ever start to come to the fore with new work and new ideas and new thought? You created a new agency in curiosity. How would you get new business? You'd have to go in and break those relationships down somehow. So for you to succeed, someone else has got to fail. I think the thing with the pitch process, it should be a fair game. It should be a fair crack at the whip for everybody. And that's why I go back to, you've got to be discerning as an agency and say no. You've got to be disciplined and say, actually, this client isn't somebody we want to work with. This industry isn't something we want to work with. Or maybe that particular search consultant, we don't like the way they do it. Maybe they are making the numbers. I'm sorry to say that some of my competitors don't do a great process. A lot of them do great work, but some of them don't. And so it's really up to you. You've got to figure that one out. But I'll go back, ditch the pitch. Fucking nonsense.
Improve the pitch. I think maybe that's.
Improve it. Make it better.
All right, let's go back to the game board.
All right, we'll go to number 9.
Number 9. What advice do you have for clients to be better clients? I mean, we heard better briefs, so that was great advice. What else would you give them?
I think the main one is treat the agencies like human beings. It's so often I see clients in, big, busy industries just treat agencies like crap. And it's like, why are you doing that? These are people. I think if you treat an agency like an extension of your team, you're more likely to treat them well, unless you treat your team like crap as well. But that would be the main thing for me is treat them like human beings, treat them with a bit of respect, and also trust them to deliver. So like, I'll go into that one a little bit. When you first have an agency relationship, there's got to be a lot of checks and balances because the client and the agency don't really know each other that well. They're getting to know each other. There has to be a little bit more oversight, checking, maybe, mid response coming back. Okay, here's where we're thinking, here's where we're going. Those working sessions need to be a bit more embedded. But as the relationship progresses and the agency starts to know who you are, and the key principal actors on the agency side, the creative directors, the lead creative, the lead strategy people, the lead account people, understand more and more about the client. I think there's a little bit to say, let them go, let them do their job. That's what you're paying them for. I say, don't have a dog and bark yourself. It's daft. If you're paying these people to do something, let them do it. Let them do it really well. And then when they come back, course correct, and then let them go. And it's funny because there's some CMOs and chief creative officers and clients who are just brilliant at working with agencies. They just get it. They treat them well. They treat them with respect. They treat them with, they let them go and do their work. They trust them. And invariably the work tends to be better. And the other thing is when you do that is the agency can be held truly accountable. If the agency delivers khaki work, then you hold them accountable. You say, look, we gave you everything, and you come back with rubbish. We're not gonna get many more chances at that one. And so I think it's a fairer way to go. I think the problem is clients often don't know how to manage like that. They like the control because they're fearful of it going wrong. So main one would be treat them with respect, and then the other one would be trust them.
That's important. All right, back to the board.
Number 1.
Number 1. Okay, after a brand breakup, how can an agency wrap the relationship with grace? Any breakup advice you can give?
Yeah, my best advice would be, remember, it's a tiny industry. And you would be amazed how many agencies do not wrap it up with grace. And they kind of set the hair on fire as they leave. The main thing to do is make sure you've got a very clear understanding of what the expectation is on you as an agency that's exiting the business. Is there a handover to the new agency? Is there, a transfer of assets? Is there, whatever it might be really clear with the client what the expectation is. And, there are some agencies that do it well, where they come to the client and they say, look, we believe that this is what you need us to do between now and the end of the year, because that's the end of our contract. We'll wait for you to put us in touch with your new agency. We'll work with them, and we'll do it in the right way. That's the, I suppose the golden way of doing it. I know it's tough because the reality is, look, when an agency loses business, the first thing a good agency does is they go, okay, who's the best talent I've got on that business, and where can I redeploy them across my other client base to be effective for my agency and for those clients? I'd do it. And so the problem is you end up often in a situation with clients where those last 2 or 3 months together, it's the junior people in the agency, it's people who maybe not the best people in an agency, and the client feels it. So I think in the way that agencies have invested in developing transition plans for when they win a business, they should probably invest a little bit of money into transition plans for when they lose a business. And what are the expectations on them, and how are they going to stay professional in doing it? Because I'll tell you something now, the amount of times I've seen clients say, I'd never work with that agency again. Now they come into a pitch and we'll say, okay, well, any agencies you want to work with, normally there's a couple they say, any agencies you wouldn't work. I would never work with those again. I worked with them at this company and they were awful when we fired them. And that stays with that agency forever. I mean, that person will never be turned. They're always going to say that agency wouldn't touch him with a barge pole. All the people at that agency have gone now, by the way, but because there was no discipline at the time, it's staying. So I think invest the same amount in developing transition plans for leaving as well as coming in. And the other thing is, retain the relationships, because you never know, it might go wrong with the new guys and they'll call you back the next week.
It is so true. So in, a little vulnerable moment for me, but last year we lost a pitch. It was down to the final two. We lost for, whatever the reasons were, which we learned from, but it hurt. Like sometimes you lose them and you're like, God, that was so perfect for us. It was going to be so good. And now it's a year post them hiring a new agency. And I got a phone call a couple of weeks ago, like, hey, by the way.
There you go, you see? There you go.
I know. And I'm like, we lost with complete and total grace, left on the best of terms. And, sometimes that can come full circle. So I'm excited by that.
It's a small, people will remember you.
It's so true. All right. So one of the ways that we love to wrap these is with a little this or that rapid fire session. And you just tell me the first thing that comes to mind. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So your first one. Here we go. A golf trip or a triathlon?
Golf trip every day.
Of course. 5 hole-in-ones. All right. A creative review or a media review?
Creative.
Fish and chips or burger and fries?
Fish and chips.
Okay. Sunny LA or sunny UK?
Definitely sunny LA. There's no sunny UK.
All right. Last one. A hole-in-one or a new biz win?
Hole-in-one.
I mean, 5 of them, man. I still can't believe that. Well, Dan, this was awesome. Thank you for spending the last hour with me. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for your transparency and your brutal honesty. As always, I expected nothing less. What's the best way for our listeners to get a hold of you?
My website, jeffriesconsulting.com. It's not very creative, but it's it's me. It's really easy to find. It's actually a new website. It looks quite nice, and I think my email address is in there, or you can find me on LinkedIn, or any of the usual nonsense. I shouldn't be.
We'll link to all of that in the show notes.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Very much. Really enjoyed it.